I'm going to turn that down for a second as we get ready to respond to this, to look at this video. You know what? I don't like where that currently is. I'm going to move it over here, possibly go like that. Yeah, let's just put it right there. Anyway, so let's look at this guy, shall we? And because I have some thoughts, definitely. I definitely have some thoughts about this, but let's hear about how piracy is morally correct.
Service providers watching, maybe don't. Thanks. Streaming services are nuking digital-only shows left, right, and center. Hollywood's been burying movies for creative accounting reasons forever. Game studios are shutting down servers for always online games that really didn't need to be online in the first place. In an era where companies can sweep away any piece of media that they deem unprofitable or irrelevant, there's a moral argument to piracy as a form of accessibility and preservation. There is no better example to encapsulate this than this project by the Completionists, spending over $20,000 to legally obtain every game across the 3DS and Wii U eShops before they closed down in March of 2023. But Josh, they actually bought the game, so it's not piracy, you dumb f. Shut the f up. You see how that's insane, right? While there's a ton of 3DS and Wii U ROMs available for your seafaring needs all over the internet, there's no singular archive that contains every published title. For good reason. Nintendo has a reputation for being particularly litigious when it comes to people infringing on their copyright. So very few people are willing to take on the risk of archiving so many titles under one roof. By going through the official route, the Completionist team took the legally safe path to archiving over 2,300 games. Most of the games on the eShop never saw a physical release, so if you want to buy a copy officially today, you can't. Look at this Letterboxd review. I know it's funny in its absurdity, but bear with me when I say it's representative of a real problem. Brother got a VPN, paid a random dude in India to get him a local phone number, then made an Indian Disney Plus account to watch this movie legitimately. He's more dedicated to this than I was to my ex-wife.
Damn.
I'm not married, I've never been married. All this effort, and you know what? Circumventing all those regional licensing restrictions isn't really legal. And in the end, it puts a few bucks in the mouse's pocket with next to nothing going to the creatives behind it. Want to play Cyberpunk in Indonesia? I hope you're a quintillionaire, because that'll be 700,000 rupiah. Want to play Hotline Miami 2 here in Australia? Fuck off, you can't, because there's a sexual assault scene in there, despite plenty of other media being published with similarly graphic content. I'm not going to argue for or against this scene in Hotline Miami 2, but the devs have openly recommended pirating the game to fans in Australia. In all of these examples, I would argue that piracy is not theft, regardless of if it's because the price is exorbitant, like in Indonesia or Brazil, or licensing and...
Yeah, like, and this is what gets me. This is what gets me about piracy and about people who are against piracy, is that it's theft when it's just digital files, right? Like, am I stealing from myself when I go on my desktop and I right-click copy file, right? Because that's essentially what you're doing, right? Let's take this game I'm playing right now, right? Baldur's Gate 3, right? If I were to right-click, copy all the files. If I were to take the entire master file of Baldur's Gate 3 and copy it to another drive and give that drive to a friend, is that theft? No, because the theft in the normal sense is that there is one less of, right? Like, if you were to steal something from a store, like a physical product from a store, that store no longer has that physical product to sell. Not so with digital files, right? because the digital files that are being circulated on like Pirate Bay and stuff like that, those files still exist on the servers of the various stores and everything like that. Like, again, if you were to copy a file, because again, these are just copies, these aren't the original file, so the company has lost nothing outside of a sale, quote unquote. And even then, they might not have lost it, because say I buy Baldur's Gate in 4 months, right? In 4 months, I am guaranteed to buy Baldur's Gate, right? So in 4 months, Larian Studios is guaranteed to make a sale off of me in 4 months. But I, during that 4 months' time, don't pirate the game. Don't play any pirated versions of the game. How is that any different than if during the lead up to that, purchase in 4 months, I do pirate the game, but then I buy it anyway again in 4 months? What is the difference between those two scenarios? I want people to lay that out. Like, what is the difference between those two scenarios? I honestly don't think there is a difference between those two scenarios, and that's why, for me, like, when it comes to like the rise of digital and where everything is basically a rental, because like even Steam has come out and stated that you are not buying anything on Steam. What you are buying when you buy games on Steam is you are buying a license to these games. You aren't buying the games themselves. You are buying a license to play these games. So if we are in the era of license and rental and streaming services like Disney Plus and stuff like that, at a certain point you have to ask yourself, how morally bad is piracy to begin with? Like, when we are no longer talking about physical products like CDs and stuff like that, because let's be honest, the PS6 and the next Xbox are not going to have a disc drive. They are singling that hardcore. Like with the PS5 Pro, the base PS5 Pro doesn't have a disc drive. Like, they are signaling hard that they are going to drop discs. Sony is cutting back as much as they can on the production of Blu-ray discs. They're already no longer producing Blu-ray, blank Blu-ray disc recordables and stuff like that. Like, they are, as quickly as they can, getting out of the Blu-ray market. Best Buy no longer sells physical movies and stuff like that. Like, if you go to Best Buy, you can no longer buy physical movies or stuff like that. So we are quickly getting to an age of purely digital only. And so the question becomes, at what point is society going to flip and just be like, I mean, what is piracy anyway if all it is just the companies being mad because you didn't buy it through illegal means, especially when they no longer sell it, right? Like morally and ethically, how bad is it that I pirate say a game for the Sega Genesis that Sega no longer sells anywhere legally, right? Like, we just gotta ask ourselves at a certain point, what is the problem here?
Distribution limitations or government censorship like here in Australia, or the fact that the devs are literally said to. The reality is that the consumer in this sort of situation was simply never going to be able to make the purchase if they wanted to. They never had access to that choice. We'll return to this idea later, but let's talk about preservation. Historical archives in the post-industrial age are a tricky task. I mean, archival work has always been difficult, but there's specific issues when it comes to working with media published on tape, discs, and cartridges. With tape-based media like audio cassettes and VHS, the actual content is stored in a magnetized coating that's on a plastic tape. To read the media off the tape, you do some funky math and magic with magnets and get an audio-visual signal out.
Fucking magnets, how do they work?
But that repeated exposure to magnetic fields deteriorates the magnetic film that contains my favorite episode of Around the Twists, and we can't have that. Also, it's the ice cream slavery one, if you want to know. So then get a brand new VHS tape and never actually play it. Two issues with that. One, good luck finding an unopened VHS tape even just a few years after publication, let alone decades down the line. And two, they'll deteriorate regardless. The magnetic film can oxidize when exposed to moisture. Even in controlled environments, the plastic tape itself is at risk of decaying. That's why it's important to transfer such media to a less volatile medium, like DVDs. What's that? DVDs and Blu-rays are vulnerable to disc rot, so they have a similar real-world lifespan to VHS tapes. Okay, let's copy them over to a hard drive. Hard drives have an even shorter lifespan. Okay. Flash storage, solid state, better than hard drives, but you still have transistor decay and charge leakage. Okay, what about archival specific formats like LTO cassettes? 30 years, controlled environment, you have to keep checking it because it's still a magnetic tape and it might decay anyway. Okay, well, fuck. How long would it take me to carve every single Garfield strip into stone tablets? How many punch cards would it take to run Doom? The best option we have so far are reels of film that typically last 50 to 70 years, but still require a pretty controlled environment to be stored in. Now, what if I told you that all that chatter about storage formats doesn't actually fucking matter? Because it doesn't. Copy Avengers Endgame to a VHS tape, nobody's gonna stop you, not even Disney, just the passage of time. The key with archiving is parity. Great example, we've got the original film reels for the 1939 Wizard of Oz somewhere in MGM's hands, but there's also multiple other reels stored in various different locations, as well as digital scans of those reels, and then digital masters that have gone out to consumers. If one Hollywood studio mysteriously burns down, then there's still other copies of the film stored all over the place. We might lose the original, but there's enough copies out there that the movie itself will continue to exist in one way or another. Obviously, we can't do this with every single piece of media, right? Well, that's where piracy comes in, sort of. Forgive me for sounding like a pie-in-the-sky crypto bro, but we have to decentralize all of our archiving if anything is going to last. For those of you unfamiliar, piracy websites aren't using their servers to store that copy of Joker 2 Electric Boogaloo that you've got downloading in the background right now. They're just putting you in the group chat with everyone else that has a copy, if that makes sense. Peer-to-peer networks operate by connecting you with seeders, essentially users hosting that file for other people to access. If this particular torrent of Leisure Suit Larry in the land of the lounge lizards has, say, 100 seeders, that's 100 different users sharing their copy of those files for anyone to access. It's parity across 100 devices, even after the original floppy disks have decayed far too much to be readable. Despite the very idyllic concept of a communal torrenting archive system, there's some obvious flaws. If nobody wants a copy of my super awesome Star Wars fan film, I'm the only one hosting it. And if I'm the only one hosting it, and Kim Jong-un nukes Australia, for example, or my hard drive dies, whichever comes first, then that's the end of the story, it's gone. Relying on the enthusiasm of strangers on the internet to offer up some storage space for the greater good of preservation is a hard sell, especially when you start getting into the copyright shenanigans that come with redistributing materials you don't own. The Internet Archive is a non-profit that offers an extensive collection of works, including 44 million pieces of literature and 800 billion web pages, 212 petabytes of information across 4 data centers. And then it was DDoSed so hard, the site was offline for a month and it was unclear if we would ever get access again to the largest archive ever created. A modern burning of Alexandria, if you will. Except we put out the flames and books were all fine, so not really that similar. Anyway, a big chunk of what's stored on the Internet Archive isn't available anywhere else, and there's a heavy reliance on the community's interest in archiving media. Be it some random Tumblr post or an old news article that's since been taken down, the Wayback Machine relies on users voluntarily archiving web pages while they're still online. Other organizations, like the Video Game History Foundation, are in a similar boat in terms of relying on community enthusiasm around preservation. But publishers aren't always on board with the idea of the greater good. During the pandemic, when most physical libraries were shuttered, the Internet Archive launched the National Emergency Library Program, stirred by academics, students, and librarians requesting help to access resources that were now out of reach because libraries were shut everywhere. The NEL temporarily altered the way that the Internet Archive lends out digital books. Their traditional policy is much like an actual library, with only one user being able to borrow a book or a scan of a book at any given time. Under the NEL, this restriction was lifted to help fulfill the demand of all the students and academics stuck at home, meaning that any number of users could get a copy of the book at the same time. Publishers immediately called this piracy and got together to collectively sue the Internet Archive. The archive's defense was that the NEL was still complying with fair use law, arguing that the program was for the sake of education and not for profit. Even after multiple appeals, the court ruled in favor of the publishers, resulting in thousands of items being removed from the archive. If the publishers themselves don't care to preserve their works for the sake of society, why should we? Why should you, dear viewer, give a shit about preserving FIFA 2015 or that Twilight fanfiction that an Indonesian 14-year-old wrote trying to scrounge up some cash to buy a copy of Cyberpunk? It's hard to sell people on the idea that all media should be preserved. There's just so much out there that a good chunk of it has to be crap, right? Have some principles, damn it. Do I personally care that every episode of Gossip Girl is archived for future generations to educate themselves with? No, not particularly, but it's the principle of it. Any piece of media that has influenced even one life is deserving of preservation. In my opinion, it is morally correct to archive any piece of media we can document, because even the smallest things shape who we are on both an individual and societal level. And sometimes, good archiving means a little bit of piracy. Video games are uniquely difficult to preserve because of all the moving parts involved, often with some core components stored halfway across the world. The Crew was an online-only racing game published by Ubisoft, and if you know Ubisoft, you can imagine where this is going. Published in 2014, the game required an internet connection to play because of the persistent open world that was hosted on Ubisoft servers. The game client itself contains all the assets required to play the game. The environment, the cars, the sound effects, all of that are on your device. And you could experience the entirety of the game in single player. But even still, you had to connect online. And then in 2024, Ubisoft shut their servers down for the game, essentially killing it on the spot. Not only did players lose access to the game that they had purchased, but the DLC and microtransactions as well. Even if you had a physical disc to put in your Xbox or PlayStation, you just couldn't. The backlash, which was massive, did prompt Ubisoft into adding an offline mode to the game's 2 sequels, but the original remains officially unplayable. The Crew isn't the only game that's been doomed to this fate. Titles like Kill the Justice League also received backlash for requiring an always online connection for solo play. An offline mode was added just 3 weeks before the servers were shut down, all in less than a year since the game released. You could go to the shops right now and buy a copy of the game and never be able to access the complete experience. What about live service games like Destiny? While it is focused on the multiplayer element in the post-game, like grades and PvP, there's a substantial story campaign that would be completely inaccessible if the servers were shut down. At the time this video goes up, the original 2013 game is still online and still playable, but who knows how long that'll last. You could argue that the narrative of the games has been preserved through the countless playthroughs that are uploaded all over the internet, but that's missing a key part of the video game experience: playing it. A video recording of someone else playing Destiny doesn't let you make the choices to build your class, to find out what weapons you really enjoy playing with. That degree of agency is something that makes video game preservation kind of difficult in comparison to other mediums. A poorly scanned copy of a book is still functional as a piece of literature, even if there's some lines you can't read. In the same way that a well-worn vinyl can still play through an entire album. However, the Destiny 2 client isn't a complete archive. When the day comes that Bungie shuts down the servers, everyone's install of the game becomes a digital paperweight. At least the data still exists. Someone could, hypothetically, find a way to run it offline, like the community around the crew did. Players have been running third-party World of Warcraft servers for ages, despite the fact that it's very much copyright infringement and Blizzard's not cool about it, but anyway. There are solutions out there for people that want to keep playing the game that they not only purchased, but also invested time and sometimes money into. But what do we do when the data was never stored on your device in the first place? Streaming services like Netflix have become an everyday part of our lives. Massive libraries at our fingertips without having to worry about a bookshelf full of DVDs or terabytes of MP4s. No, wrong. Editor Josh, wrong MP4. While the benefit of streaming video on demand is convenience, the downside is that you never have a tangible copy of anything. This, along with the decline of physical media, means that many shows and movies that are published in this day and age go directly to streaming and never get a DVD or Blu-ray release. You never get to own something yourself. Case in point, Disney published, cancelled, and took down Willow within 6 months. It is one thing to take a product off shelves if it isn't selling, but consumers were never given an option to purchase a copy of Willow in the first place. If it weren't for the people that had ripped the show for others to watch while it was still online, the existence would have been nothing more than a barren Wikipedia page. To finally come back around to that title that you clicked on, Piracy is morally correct as a form of media preservation. It's something that's a bit tricky to navigate. You can't preemptively rip 6 seasons of Below Deck because you won't know that it's being taken down before it's too late. You can't archive every single piece of media that you've ever watched because A, that's a lot of storage, and B, illegal to pirate, or C, very expensive to obtain legally. But coming back to the point I made earlier, if it's not on store shelves, if it's not available online through official or resellers or streaming, is it really stealing when there's nowhere I could buy it from in the first place? If I want to play something from the 3DS eShop in 2025, I don't have that choice. I can't buy something. If I want to watch Willow, I can't get a Blu-ray or watch it on Disney+. If there simply are not legitimate means for me to give company money for products, then piracy's not hurting their bottom line. There was never going to be a purchase regardless. Thank you for watching all the way to the end of the video. Hopefully that means that...
I mean, yeah. All true. And so, yeah. It's piracy is a tricky moral thing. It really just comes down to your own moral comfort. But also for me, I mean, like, again, if you guys have read my bio, I do not hide what I am. I mean, so I don't hide the fact that I'm an anti-capitalist. So at the end of the day, the pro-capitalist arguments against piracy hold absolutely no weight for me because I obviously don't give a slight fuck. So it really just comes down to like, it's, especially when everything is going to go pure digital anyway. I mean, let's just be honest, by the time we get to by the time we get well deep into the 2030s, like, there's going to be no physical media left. Like, everything is going to be purely digital, purely streaming. There's going to be maybe Nintendo will be the remaining holdout of physical media with their basically custom what amounts to SD cards for the Switch systems. But other than that, everything will be bought through e-stores and electronic stores. Like everything will be bought through Google Play, the App Store, Steam, stuff like that. And so, uh, you know, it's going to be an increasing challenge to keep up the arguments against piracy when ultimately at the end of the day these companies are not losing basically anything through piracy, especially when you consider the studies, multiple studies that have proven that pirates purchase more media than non-pirates. So if you take that into consideration, that on average pirates purchase and spend more on media than non-pirates, especially when you take into consideration other things. Like say I pirate a movie. That's bad. But I purchase merchandise for that movie because it turns out that movie that I pirated, I really, really like. And so I purchase merchandise associated with that movie. And say I purchase more merchandise than like I purchase in total more merchandise than the singular purchase of the movie would have been. Like, say a movie is released on Google Play Movies and you can buy it for, say, $20. But I pirate that movie instead. And then I go on to spend, say, $2,000 on merchandise for associated with that movie or the franchise that movie's a part of. Is my piracy still morally bad? That question falls on each individual to answer for themselves. But in my moral framework, the answer is a resounding no. And same thing goes for games, right? Like if you were to same thing goes for games that if you were to pirate a video game, but then you go on to spend more merchandise. It's the fact that we got to remember that what makes piracy even more difficult is the fact that millennials like me grew up in a day and age when companies actually had things to fight back against piracy because in my day and age pretty much every major AAA game that came out had demos. I know Gen Z does not definitely remember this, but millennials definitely do remember being able to go to the store. You can go to 7-Eleven and get a video game magazine, and that magazine would come with a demo disc, just full of game demos that you can play for every major upcoming release. And that was a fantastic way of getting rid of combating piracy because it was a nice way for consumers to try games before they buy it because you don't know if you're going to like a game until you actually try it because video games are interactive, right? I can watch as many video reviews as I want. I can watch 1,000 hours of video reviews on a single game, right? I could spend 1,000 hours on YouTube watching video review after video review for Baldur's Gate 3 and never actually know if I'm going to enjoy it until I actually played it myself. And so, with the fact that game publishers no longer make game demos, in my view, pirating a video game is essentially a really long form version of a game demo, especially when putting cards on the table. I have pirated games before and won't continue to do so. And those games I pirated, I would later buy them because I actually found out through actually playing them that I enjoyed them, and so I would go on Steam and actually buy them because pirated versions of these games are not the best versions. because of the fact that there are still major benefits to buying the actual version on Steam. First and foremost, you get access to Steam achievements. That's just a small thing, but even more so, you get access to up-to-date patches, right? Like, if you were to go online right now and look for a pirated version of a game, you only get access to the patch that was uploaded for that specific file. So the pirated version of the game that you're the pirated version of a game may be 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe even double digits patches in the past. And so it may be incredibly out of date when it comes to patches. And so as a pirate, you have to deal with all of that, plus as well as the fact that the file may be malware or spyware or many other things, because there's no trust at all with the digital files for how big these games are, about anything that's in there, right? You are taking a massive gamble that the file you're getting is what is advertised. You have no promises at all that what you are downloading is what you think you're downloading, and so there is massive risk involved there. Just to the compromise of your own computer, of your own computer systems, as you might be installing something that you really don't want to install. So there's all these problems that are very well known in that scene that you just have to accept if you're going to go down that path. And so it's not as if the legal, legitimate versions of these games don't have massive benefits. It's why game companies still make games for PC, even though there is still the massive risk that the PC version of the game will be pirated, will be ripped and pirated and all that stuff, because of the fact that PC gamers oftentimes can spend more than will be lost due to piracy, as well as the fact that, again, pirates may turn around and buy the game, because, again, for me, for example, let's just go out with it. Let me give a real world example. I didn't know, honestly, if one, I was going to enjoy the game of Marvel's Spider-Man, and two, if my computer can even run the game, because my computer was more powerful than the minimum recommended specs. But again, with computers, it's all a fucking crapshoot if your specific system can actually even run a game. And so I had no idea. And Marvel Spider-Man doesn't have a demo. So the only legal way that I could do is to actually spend the cold hard cash. Now you would say, oh, well, there's the Steam refund policy. Yes, but the Steam refund policy is only goes as far as 2 hours. Basically, their Steam tracks individually how many hours you spend playing a game. Once that ticker gets above 2 hours, you can no longer request a refund for that game. They will just automatically deny it, unless it's an extreme case. And so you would say, oh, well, you play the game, you definitely know that your game can run it. Not necessarily. Because the game can run great. And this has happened. You can talk to PC gamers, where you can play a game for like 10 hours, and it runs flawlessly. And then there's just a specific area of a game, 10, 12 hours in, that just crashes. You are crashing to the desktop constantly. And so you have no idea. And again, that's 12 hours into the game. You are way past refund policy. So if you are at a point where your system literally can no longer play the game at all, and you're 12 hours in, you have no fucking clue. And of course, the developers couldn't have warned you because they don't know, because they can't predict, because there are like a trillion different permutations of computers out there, right? Because you can have a 50, you can have, say, like a 50, you can have like a 5090 graphics card with this CPU and this RAM and, you know, and all like, and this motherboard. It's like there is a trillions of different permutations of computer setups out in the wild. And so no developer can predict accurately that the game will run flawlessly at all times, on all settings, on all situations. So I had to, you know, and especially for a game as graphically demanding as Marvel's Spider-Man, especially being the fact that the PC version launched with the next-gen upgrades of ray tracing, I had to know if the game would even run on my computer. And so, yeah, I'm pirated it. And played it for a few hours and got at least halfway through the story that way, because I had to make sure that the game would even run. And once I was secure in the mind that my computer could handle it, as well as I thoroughly enjoyed the game, and I wanted access to all the patches and everything to make sure that the game continued to run stable, I bought it at full price. I didn't wait for a Steam sale or anything like that. I bought the game at full retail price on Steam, including I bought the game full retail price, as well as I also bought Miles Morales because I wanted to play that game too. I wanted to play that because I really enjoyed the story of Marvel Spider-Man. So I also got Miles Morales on Steam, etc. Mainly what I'm getting at is that one ultimate kind of iffy morally decision of pirating Marvel Spider-Man led to me buying Marvel Spider-Man and Miles Morales at full retail price. So it's like, again, it's all up to the individual to decide for themselves whether or not piracy is ultimately a good thing. But that, again, that's just up to the individual. So that's just where I'll leave it at that. I'll just leave it with whatever you guys think. Whatever you guys think about piracy is